That's what this delegation here is talking about today. Look, global economic inflation, high gas and electricity prices, unrest in Eastern Europe, and global supply chain chaos are realities we all face this year. Combined, there is an ongoing global energy crisis. Yet, we are incredibly optimistic. We're optimistic for the new congressional leadership in Washington, and most importantly, we're optimistic for the policy path the lawmakers here will discuss today. The policy proposals you'll soon hear about would not only put us on a path to a stronger economy in the U.S., but they think globally about climate change and how to reduce global emissions. The U.S. has made world-leading absolute emissions reductions in the last decade, and our share of global emissions are trending down from 14 to 12.5% of the global total. We believe the policy framework they are laying out will equip other nations with access to cleaner technologies to repeat America's decarbonization story, even as they develop their own economies. If we eliminate false choices and unleash American resources, we can solve the climate challenge and support a healthy global economy. I'd now like to introduce Heather Reams, co-chair of the Conservative Climate Foundation.
Much shorter. Thank you, Rich. I'm Heather Reams, co-chair of the Conservative Climate Foundation and president of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, known as CREST Forum. We're a nonprofit organization based in the U.S., and we educate policymakers and the public about durable, conservative solutions for our nation's energy, economic, and environmental security. In short, we recognize that our climate challenges and seek durable, long-term policies to address climate change. Based on the U.S. elections on Tuesday, Republicans look poised to become the majority party in the U.S. House of Representatives. There is great interest, especially here at COP, as to what that means for energy and climate policy in the United States. You'll be hearing from some of those members from Congress today. There is consensus across the American political spectrum on the need for addressing climate change. However, there are differences of perspective on what American policies will be most effective to reduce domestic and global emissions while also advancing broader economic and security interests of America and our allies. The United States is rapidly reducing its domestic emissions, and it's time to translate that success globally. Leveraging American success requires our continued leadership in developing and deploying innovative clean energy technologies. To maximize efforts to reduce emissions, global emissions, these technologies need to be affordable and exportable for all economies. Reducing global emissions also necessitates American leadership in producing and exporting energy resources, manufactured goods, and commodities. We must take full advantage of the fact that American producers are among the most carbon efficient in the world. Therefore, addressing climate change requires policies that accelerate American production, not policies that constrain it. In fact, restraining efficient producers, especially when global demand for low-carbon solutions is increasing, will only perpetuate the growth of global emissions. Today, we will hear about a uniquely American approach to reducing global emissions and mitigating climate change while prioritizing lower energy costs and energy security. It is built around what America does best: innovate, produce, and lead. And it focuses on what is necessary to mitigate climate change, affordably reducing global emissions. We are fortunate to have several members of Congress here today. Many are part of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Several are also members of the House Republican Leadership Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force. All are Republican voices who will be shaping the congressional energy and climate agenda next year. It is my pleasure to introduce Congressman Garrett Graves of Louisiana, who is the ranking member of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and lead for the House Republicans' Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force. From the task force, he has spearheaded the development of a 6-part strategy to tackle the ongoing energy crisis and the global climate problem that was released earlier this year. Congressman.
Thanks, Heather. Hey, thanks and good afternoon. Appreciate you all being here. First of all, I think that there are 3 things that we all need to be thinking about as we plot a course forward in regard to energy security and emissions. Number one is recognizing the fact that the United States has led the world in reducing emissions, not 1 year or 2 years, but over about a 17-year history. And as a matter of fact, during the previous administration, emissions went down an average of 2.5% a year, yet the abrupt changes we've seen in energy technology and energy policy over the last 18 months, we've actually seen emissions go up, not go down. We've watched energy affordability become out of reach for many Americans. Which brings me to the second point. I think that there are a lot of lessons learned that we can extract from other countries, whether it be in Europe or even within our own country, within the state of California and some New England states that have tried to move in a more aggressive direction, resulting in, I think, some outcomes that are not positive. And I think the last thing is that we've got to stay clearly focused on energy affordability and not forcing our citizens into energy poverty by forcing technologies that are not exportable. There are 5 principles that we must adhere to as we move forward. The first of which I've highlighted 3 times already. It's the affordability of energy. It's absolutely critical. Secondly is reliable energy technologies. The third one is clean energy technologies or clean energy solutions. The fourth one is exportable energy, and the fifth one is ensuring that we have secure supply chains. As we've moved forward in the United States and we've tried to force ourselves in a direction where you force the uptake of renewable energy technology, today 1 in every 4 Americans, 1 in every 4 are having to choose among food, medicine, or covering energy costs, which includes gasoline and utility costs. 1 in every 4. We've seen over the last several months where 1 in every 5 Americans have actually had to skip paying utility bills. This is what happens whenever you're not paying attention to facts, science, and data. In this case, the Department of Energy has projected that we're going to have a 50% growth in global energy demand. 50% growth in global energy demand. We need to be looking holistically in the United States and globally, looking at the resources that are available, determining how we're going to meet that growing energy demand, and recognizing that you are going to have extraordinary growth in all technology sectors, meaning wind and solar, wave and geothermal, nuclear and hydrogen, as well as oil and gas. And if we're going to be increasing global demand of oil and gas, we must ensure that the extraction, the exploration, and production activities are occurring in places where we have the lowest emissions per unit of energy, which largely is in the United States and the Gulf of Mexico. And so it's critical, let me say this again, that we're following science, that we're following facts, and we're following data. And we're applying lessons learned from other countries and states that have tried to move forward, forcing technologies that are not ready, that are not deployable, that are not affordable, that are not exportable, because we can see what happens when you do that. The state of California, for example, twice the electricity rates of my home state of Louisiana, 8th worst emissions growth in America, most dependent state upon foreign energy, least reliable grid in the nation. Why in the world would we want to force these outcomes on other states or force these outcomes on other countries? These are failed approaches that refuse to recognize what science, what data, what reality is projecting. So I won't go through and repeat these, but I want to be clear. We have a crystal clear approach on how we're going to move forward using these 6 items behind me, how we're going to move forward in deploying reliable, affordable, clean, exportable, and secure energy supplies, and making sure that the United States continues to lead the world in reducing emissions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Congressman Graves, for your leadership on this issue. I'm now going to turn to Congressman John Curtis from Utah. Congressman Curtis has been at the forefront and is a leading Republican voice on climate change. 2 years ago, he founded the Conservative Climate Caucus in the United States House of Representatives. It only took a few months for the caucus's membership to grow to more than 75 members, so it's now the 2nd largest caucus of Republicans in D.C., including a number of the senior leaders who are very likely to run committees of jurisdiction come January. And I'm pleased to hand things over now to John Curtis.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you to my colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Let me tell you just a little bit about Utah so you can understand the Conservative Climate Caucus. My district in Utah, if you haven't been there, I'm going to invite all of you here to come see me. It's one of the most beautiful districts in the world. If you've heard of Moab, Arches National Park, Bears Ears, all the ski resorts are in my district. Yet it has a dynamic that some people find surprising. I have what's called an R plus 39 district. Now, if you don't understand that number, it simply means I have a 39% advantage over my Democratic opponent in the election. It's very, very conservative. This district has a unique characteristic that I think all conservatives share. They care deeply about the land that we inherit from our fathers and our mothers. They care deeply about leaving it better than they found it. Yet, ironically, we've been branded as not caring about the environment. Why? Because we push back on the litmus test and the extremism of ideas that take the head off to fix the headache. So as a young Republican member of Congress, when I went to Washington, D.C., I was really bothered by this reputation because I knew Utahns were the best environmentalists in the world. They just hated being called environmentalists because of the connotation. And I could tell my colleagues in Washington wanted to talk about this too, but in many ways didn't know how to talk in an environment where there was so much extremism about the ideas. So we came up with the idea of forming a caucus. In Washington, a lot of things work and organize themselves around a caucus. Well, what would we call it? If we called it We Care, nobody would pay attention to us. If we called it anything but climate, with climate in the word, nobody would pay attention to us. But we wanted the word conservative in there to show that we were different, that we had different ideas, and we had important solutions. So we formed the Conservative Climate Caucus. And as Rich mentioned, within a few months, it quickly became the second largest Republican caucus in Washington, D.C. Does anybody here, would they have made me a bet 2 years ago that if we formed a caucus called Conservative Climate Caucus, it would be the second largest Republican caucus? It shows you, Rich knew, Heather knew, it shows you how much interest there is among Republicans in engaging in this debate. Now, a couple of points. Without Republicans engaging in this debate, we will not make the progress we need to make as a country. Any significant accomplishment in the United States has been bipartisan. The ideas, not only that, the ideas that Republicans bring to the table are essential to meeting the goals that we all have for a better environment. Most often we hear from a lot of our Democratic colleagues, we want to reach these goals, but we don't quite know how we're going to do it. We don't have the innovation to do it. I think Republicans know how to fill those gaps and bring very, very important ideas to the table. And you'll hear this caucus moving forward and growing in the future. It dovetails very nicely with what Garrett Graves has done with the 6 pillars. Our mission is to make sure every Republican understands those 6 pillars and knows how to legislate to move them forward. So it's a delight to be here with you and represent the caucus and all 75 members. And I'm going to predict, Rich, when we come back next year, we are the largest Republican caucus in Washington, D.C.
Very clear goal. Very clear goal. Let's hope that's true. So thank you both very much for your leadership on this. Before we get to wider Q&A, I'm just going to ask a quick question for each of the members here. I'm going to start with Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas. Representative Crenshaw, actions and policies to deal with climate change obviously can't only be viewed domestically. There are geopolitical consequences that come from domestic choices in energy and climate policy, whether it's control of the supply of minerals, energy resources, production of goods, developing and manufacturing innovative technologies such as advanced nuclear. There are geopolitical consequences that come with these outcomes. Can you talk about those geopolitical opportunities and risks and what's at stake in getting these policies right and getting them wrong?
Absolutely, and thanks, Rich. Thanks for everybody for being here and listening. I mean, you're seeing some of the geopolitical consequences now in Europe. I think that's pretty obvious to everyone. There might have been a much bolder response to the Russians from Europe as a whole if they weren't completely reliant on Russia for natural gas. And how did they even get to that point? Well, you get to that point, it's not as if there's no resources inside Europe. You get to that point by misguided policies in the first place that are obsessive in nature, almost very ideological in nature. Very, very singular solution oriented. And what I'm talking about is what I call the deification of solar and wind only solutions. So Germany spends $500 billion in their own sort of Green New Deal, and look where they're at. burning biomass, which they call carbon neutral, which I do not agree with, but mostly reliant on Russian natural gas. That's a problem, and so that's a problem for your geopolitics in general, because if you're going to define your geopolitics, it might be your standing vis-a-vis other nations, and whether or not you are dependent on others for your own well-being, whether or not your prosperity depends on other countries. And so we don't want that. And right now we're in that situation, especially we're in that situation if we go along with the deification of solar and wind only solutions, because 70% of solar panels are made in China. The vast majority of processing for rare earth minerals is in China. China is not friendly to us. They're the world's biggest emitter, and I don't care what kind of rhetoric they say, they have no intentions of decreasing those emissions. And so what are we going to do about that? Well, conservative solutions are surrounding things like, let's have better regulation and permitting processes in America, because we actually have those resources, and maybe we should process that. They should be honest also about the carbon footprint of the Chinese processing these things, sending them across the ocean to the United States, and then saying it's carbon free when it's not. A more honest conversation, I think, is what we're after, because look, as we're going to bring this back 30,000 feet, and prosperity is the goal, and energy security is the goal, and clean energy is the goal. And I would define energy security as energy that works when you want it to at a reliable price that you can predict. That would be energy security. And so you need to have that, right? For prosperity, you need to have that. If prosperity is our goal, which I think it is. And so as policymakers, we have to look at the problem and then make an honest assessment on whether or not the solutions to the problem have a higher cost than the problem itself. And that has turned out to be true in places like California, as Garrett mentioned. It's turned out to be true in Europe. We're complaining about our energy prices. Have you seen Europe's utility bills? They're out of control. They're completely unaffordable. And so the cost of action has turned out to be far higher than the cost of the problem itself. And that's just if you believe the UN's report, which I would assume everyone at this conference does, which says that we have about a 4.5% cost to our global GDP by the year 2100 because of climate change. That's from what it otherwise would be. Now, that's not nothing, but it's pretty close to nothing. And we better not have a higher cost for our solutions than the problem itself. We better have rational environmentalism instead of radical environmentalism. Radical environmentalism will send us down a path of poverty and despair, and probably higher emissions in the end, too. So we want to do it smarter, and I think that's what Garrett and John are leading so well.
Thanks very much. Congressman Marionette Miller-Meeks from the great state of Iowa, I'm going to come to you next. This agenda includes a focus on agriculture and conservation, including natural solutions to sequester emissions. Iowa is obviously a leading agricultural state and has seen tremendous efficiency gains in production. And now innovative precision farming has created the opportunity to make agricultural production in the United States even more efficient and less carbon intensive. This is very important given that the demand for agricultural commodities, especially amidst a world food crisis, is expected to increase more than 15% in the next decade. Your policy efforts include other natural climate solutions, such as the Trillion Trees Initiative and utilizing forests and unproductive farmland. Why is the value of American agriculture part of the solution to reducing global emissions?
Well, as you said, Iowa is an agricultural state, so 25% of our GDP is from agriculture. And agriculture is part of the solution to reducing emissions and also affordable energy solutions, including liquid fuels. So certainly the Trillion Trees Initiative, which Representative Bruce Westerman championed, we know that trees sequester carbon. It's a great source to sequester carbon. We also know that plants inspire or take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So in Iowa and other agricultural economies are looking at ways that you can enhance agriculture. You can use less fertilizer, yes, pesticide, less fungicide, but still have a high crop yield, because we know that the demand globally for food and food products and food commodities is very high. So precision agriculture is something that is very much in vogue in Iowa. Also reducing fungicides, having crops that are modified so that they're drought resistant. We also have biochar. have put forth a bill in Congress for a biochar institute to study biochar. For those that don't know what biochar is a product that can come from wood. It can come from the residue or the stover of any organic product. High temperature, high heat reduces down to carbon, almost like charcoal product, but you can plant it into the soil, either marginal soil or topsoil, or if you have a no-till agricultural landmass. But it helps with soil quality, water filtration, improves the microbiomes within the soil, and it helps with improve marginal soil quality as well. So when you look at what we're doing in the agricultural space, it has a huge contribution. And then the flip side of that coin is energy production. So not only on conservation, but on energy production. So we do ethanol, biodiesel. We use manure from livestock production to go back into energy sources. And also the heat that's generated from digesters goes back in. So you have a closed loop system. And I think we have some people here that are using that closed loop system. But then we also have the residue, not just the corn kernel or a soybean, but you have the residue, the stover that can go into compressed natural gas and can go into biodiesel. And I've seen some of those displays here today. So it's really amazing what the agricultural sector is doing to, number one, reduce carbon emissions, number two, replenish soil, water quality, but then also their contribution to providing liquid fuels as well as food for the globe.
Clearly huge opportunity there. Congressman Curtis, I'm going to come back to you. You've all talked about unleashing American resources. And so whether that's lower carbon fossil fuels or critical minerals could be a significant part of the solution, both domestically and as an export. And yet you're sometimes challenged for being, continuing to be a supporter of oil and gas. How do you square these things, and how do you think about unleashing American resources as a big part of the climate solution?
I learned a new term just now from Congressman Crenshaw, and it was the deifying of wind and solar. So if on one hand we're deifying wind and solar, on the other hand we're demonizing fossil fuels. And I think we need to decide as a world, do we hate greenhouse gas emissions or do we hate fossil fuels? It's not the same thing. Congressman Graves, to my left, mentioned how much the U.S. has reduced our greenhouse gas emissions. We did that with the fossil fuel. And you can imagine, now I represent a county, and I love to talk about this. This county is called Carbon County. What do you suppose they do in Carbon County, right? They mine coal and they have a coal-burning plant. You can imagine how they feel when we demonize fossil fuels, and then our leaders hop on a plane and go to our enemies and ask them to produce more fossil fuels. And you can see the hypocrisy, and they see the hypocrisy. They see the hypocrisy of all of us here who fly here on jets and use fossil fuels and talk about being green, right? They see that. And yet these are the very people who I think can lead us in an energy revolution, a clean energy revolution. These are the very people who for decades and decades and decades sacrificed their health and their safety so that we could go to the wall and flip a switch and have the lights come on, or turn a knob and be 70 degrees in the winter. These are bright people. They're smart, and they want to innovate, and they want to become part of the green future. Why are we knocking the knees out from underneath them? The second thing is, in this Carbon County that I mentioned, underneath the surface, they have all this coal. Well, guess what? They also have these critical minerals. They would love to transition off of coal to critical minerals, and yet 90% of their land, think about this, 90% of their land is owned by the federal government and has been put off limits for gathering those critical minerals by our federal government. Once again, they see the hypocrisy in that as we turn overseas and go to conditions that are less safe, less clean to mine these very minerals. So, of course, we want to talk about using U.S. resources. At the same time, we need to challenge the U.S. industries to be cleaner, to be more efficient in the things that they do, to come up with new techniques and new innovations. And I'm willing to bet on them that they can do that and help us meet our goals.
Thanks very much. Congressman Graves, I'm going to come back to you one more time. You cut your teeth in Louisiana, running the Coastal Commission very ably. In the past year, America has seen hurricanes, ice storms, wildfires, and flooding. Louisiana is obviously no stranger to those natural disasters, and that's been a big part of your career, helping the state adjust to those. Your plan recognizes the importance of building resilient communities and hardening critical infrastructure. You've made that a part of the task force agenda. Can you explain why you've baked in resilience as a priority and how you'd prioritize that in policy next year?
Sure. So look, first of all, I'm going to say this over and over again. We've got to use more science, not less. We've got to use more science. And we've clearly seen as communities have developed closer to the coast, they've developed closer to our forest than others, and you've seen additional trends or changing trends in regard to severe weather events. Just in my home state in recent years, we've had a 1,000-year flood, 500-year flood, 500-year flood, 250-year flood. Either I'm older than I look or something's wrong. And so we've got to make investments. There have been various studies that have shown that for every $1 you invest, you get $4 in cost savings, $10 in cost savings, or I believe you use the right criteria, even higher. So this is all about what some folks refer to as resilience, what others refer to as adaptation. This is about making investments in communities where you have vulnerabilities and making sure that these communities are resilient enough to withstand these storms or these disaster events, and make sure that we're not continuing to come in to put the pieces back together, continuing to come in and spend these billions of dollars. So it's all about making targeted investments of millions of dollars rather than extraordinary investments of billions of dollars in the aftermath of a disaster. At the same time, events like Hurricane Katrina losing 1,500 of our brothers, sisters, cousins, neighbors, mothers, fathers, and others in our community. So that's what that's about, and it's all about following the science and making targeted investments.
Great, really helpful. The one pillar that we haven't talked about as much is your innovation pillar. In the past 6 years since 2017, when Republicans took control, there's been historic increases in clean energy R&D funding, and the Energy Act of 2020, which you all led, has a Manhattan Project scale investment in clean energy innovation. I wonder if I go down the line and give each of you 1 minute, we'll do a lightning round here, and this will be the last annoying question for me. What's one priority you think we should really advance in clean energy innovation in the next Congress? And I'm going to start on the far end and that was a surprise. I'm going to start with Representative Miller Meeks.
Well, Iowa did have a nuclear power plant which closed down 2 years ago, so I would say investments in fourth, fifth, small generation nuclear reactors, not only for the United States, but also for developing countries to give them cleaner sources of energy to develop their economies.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I mean, I would go broader and say invest in denser energy. Energy that is dense and small and affordable. And so nuclear is definitely that. Gas is that. Coal is that. The coal isn't clean. So invest in nuclear. I think there's a lot of other innovations that are really interesting on the energy front, whether it's in hydrogen or even just some of the materials building that we see here in these exhibits. I think is really interesting. But I'm very skeptical of less energy dense forms of production like solar, like wind, like battery power that require massive amounts of excavation of earth to make them. Because rare earth minerals, well, they're not that rare, but they do require a ton of earth to even extract them at all. Moving away from over-subsidizing that, because that receives about 250 times more subsidies than nuclear does, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So we need to, I think, level the playing field in what kind of tax credits we give and what kind of technologies we fund and focus on energy-dense production.
I'm going to redefine your question a little bit, but just make note that the United States spends more money on energy research and development than the rest of the world combined. And I think that we've got one of the things that we need to do with our energy research program is we need to be more strategic about what the goals are rather than having 1,500 loosely affiliated stovepipes. Ensure that we truly are establishing goals, have a strategic R&D plan. And then secondly, I want to kind of make note of both what John and Dan said. John very appropriately made note. The target here that we're trying to attack is the emissions. It's not the energy source. And I think that our research and development needs to be focused on the types of energy resources that each country has. And in the United States, one of those is oil and gas, 30 times the energy density of the next closest renewable. So one of the things we ought to be doing is not attacking oil and gas, but be attacking the emissions associated with it to where it can be indistinguishable from other renewable energy technologies, to where it can be an arrow in the quiver as we try to address our objectives of energy affordability, reliability, cleanliness, exportability, and security of supply chain. Over.
Okay, I'm gonna pick right up where he left off, because I was thinking direct air capture, carbon sequestration, storage, etc. Look, if all countries that are here do everything they can to reduce emissions, we still have countries that are not here that are not reducing their emissions. We've got to get to the point where we can pull carbon out of the air if we're going to meet our goals. So I'd like to see us go big: direct air capture, carbon sequestration, nuclear, fusion, hydrogen.
Anything else?
Well, I'm going to bet. I'll make all of you a bet here. When we sit on this stage in the year 2050, we're going to look back, and there's going to be an innovation that has come along that we're not even thinking of today that's going to play an important role. And that's why good old innovation is so important, and that's where the U.S. is really strong.
Really strong. And again, the investments that you all have made and the moonshot programs that were established as part of the Energy Act do establish those major technology demonstration goals for everything you just discussed. Of course, we now have to get that done, but the law was a great start, and the funding was a great start. So thank you for that. We're now going to go to questions from the audience. We've got a couple folks already in the queue. We're going to start with Frank Jordans from the Associated Press, who is maybe back there. Frank, can we get you a mic? Great.
Thanks, that was unexpected. I'd like to ask you whether you're seeing a shift at the moment among conservatives when it comes to the issue of climate change, whether, let's say, the position that climate change isn't happening is being pushed back amid the reality of the extreme weather events that we've seen in the last few years. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why your caucus is seeing such growth in numbers.
Yeah, a couple of points. The shift might be more dramatic in how we're talking about it than how we feel about it. And I think that's evident in the Conservative Climate Caucus, where we had so many members jump in. I think they're getting more comfortable talking about it and realizing we do have ideas and we have nothing to hide from. I also think that part of the problem with the climate movement is the litmus test. And what I mean by the litmus test is the climate changing and has man influenced it? That's a litmus test. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with timeshares, but if you've ever been to a timeshare presentation where somebody's trying to sell you something that you know that you don't want to buy, and they ask you, Mr. Curtis, do you love your family? You often will say no, because you know they're going to try to sell you something. And I think Republicans feel that same way about that question. It's not so much the question, it's what comes next. And so I would say we've always cared deeply about the earth. We've always had solutions, but I think we're doing a better job of being articulated about it.
Can I say something too? I mean, I think what conservatives were naturally reacting to was hyper-alarmism. Again, I distinguish between radical environmentalism and rational environmentalism. Radical environmentalism is what we mostly see, and that perpetuates solutions that are damn right scary and foolish. That's what people are reacting to. They're saying the world's going to end. They're saying we're on fire. Also attributing weather events to climate change when there's no science to back that up. So what I think we've been very successful in doing over the last few years is saying, okay, fine, let's actually have the conversation. Let's look at the science. Let's look at the UN's report. It doesn't say what the headlines say. That's a key thing to remember. There's a cost. There's problems that we should deal with and that we have an interest in mitigating. There's conservation efforts that we have an interest in perpetuating, absolutely. But let's not lie to our children and scare them to death and tell them they're going to burn alive because of this, because that is not what it says. That's not what the UN report says. And I think if we approach it with rational environmentalism, where we all start to agree that we want clean air, clean water, better conservation, and cleaner energy, we can all be on the same page. But let's not lie about it.
Next, we're going to go to, I'll come back in just a second. Next, we're going to go to Max Bayrock from the New York Times. Still have Max? Anywhere? No? Gone? Okay. All right, well, then I'm going, let's see. Next, I'm going to go to Ruth from NPR. Still have Ruth? You okay? Okay, great. Well, then next, I'm going to go to Madeline Lepere from Citizens Climate Lobby.
Thank you very much. And my thanks, first of all, to all of you for being here and coming after a grueling campaign in the U.S. midterms and hopping on that plane. I deeply appreciate it. You've added to the breadth of discussion, each one of you, and that's what the COP is all about, is bringing people from everywhere with lots of thoughts on this. Representative Graves, you spoke about the importance of bipartisanship and stronger solutions coming from it. So my question to all of you is, where do you see the path forward between Republicans and Democrats in the next Congress? In the same way that the parties here are trying to find agreement, where can you reach and they reach for you?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, I think when you start talking about the term climate change or global warming, as Congressman Crenshaw just noted, I think that means different things to different people. And I think that's what causes, to some degree, the polarization that you see. I think what's most important is that we instead take this into bite-sized pieces. Let's talk about things like redesigning the grid to be able to handle distributed generation from some of the concentrated generation systems are largely based upon today. Let's talk about investments in resilience. Let's talk about concepts like conservation or energy efficiency, where you actually reduce the cost of energy consumption for residential or commercial consumers, bringing down the cost of building products in your country, therefore improving competitiveness. Look, there are many, many things when you begin breaking this up in bite-sized pieces where we're all on the same page. I think what it also does, as Congressman Crenshaw mentioned, is that when you begin breaking things up in bite-sized pieces, you find the solutions that are actually cost-effective versus those that simply don't make sense and result in us sort of causing perverse incentives or perverse economics to where you don't achieve an objective, and I can't state this enough, that's really critical in any solution. Our solutions have to be both economically sustainable and environmentally sustainable. It is the only way they're going to transcend the politics of going from one administration to another. Otherwise, you're just going to have this situation where the Biden administration inflates subsidies, then the DeSantis administration or whoever comes in and takes them away. And
get clipped.
And all right, who is it?
You heard it here.
We heard the prediction just now. There it is.
Whoever it is. But it's a really dangerous trajectory because you're taking away that predictability or certainty that all of the businesses are looking for in order to know how to invest.
All right, we now have to wrap this session. I am going to do one last bit of fun, one last lightning round going down the line. If you all have one, maybe two, at most 3 sentences that you'd like everyone to take away as a final message from this, what would those be? 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. I'm giving you extra time to frame up your sentences. I'll start on this end, to be fair, this time. So we'll start with Representative Curtis.
Okay, this is very easy. We can have energy independence, we can have low, affordable, reliable prices, and we can reduce emissions.
The United States has led the world in reducing emissions over the last 17 years. We've reduced emissions more than the next 7 emissions-reducing countries combined. We're not asking you to make a 180. We're asking you to double and triple down on the solutions that have worked. Once again, economically sustainable and environmentally sustainable.
I'm going to add to that. I can't do it in 3 sentences. Sorry. But I am from Houston, so I haven't even said the words oil and gas yet. But, you know, there's an interesting study out there. If you let our industry do whatever they needed to do, our gas industry, let them build the pipelines they need, let them build the export terminals they need, they could probably quadruple production exports in the next 10 years. What would that do? What would be the equivalent? If then our U.S. government made a point of making sure that gas was displacing carbon-heavy coal, what would happen? It would be the equivalent of giving every American solar panels, giving every American a Tesla, and doubling our wind capacity. That's the equivalent in carbon reductions of doing something like that. That's how we have to be thinking about this. And by the way, that's very economically sustainable.
We all want to leave a cleaner, healthier planet for our children and our grandchildren, and to do so in a way that is affordable and provides increased energy demands for individuals throughout the world, and allows us in the United States to compete in a global economic climate.
Very well done. Very well done. Well, so I want to thank all of the members, including our other members, Congressman Murphy, Congressman Wahlberg, from the caucus and from the delegation. I want to thank my co-chair at the Conservative Climate Foundation, Heather Reams, and I want to thank the U.S. Department of State for facilitating this discussion today. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all for coming to the U.S. Center. We will be live streaming President Biden's remarks here at the U.S. Center at 5:15. He won't be here, but we will live stream his talk at 5:15 here at the U.S. Center. Thank you.